You walk out to your garden early in the morning. The light is soft, the air is still cool, and then you see it. A row of seedlings you planted just 3 days ago. Leaves ragged, stems half-eaten, some of them pulled down to almost nothing. You look around. Nothing is there. No caterpillars, no beetles, no sign of what did it. Just the damage. Quiet and complete. Most gardeners have been in that exact moment, and most of them do the same thing next. They drive to the store, they buy a box of slug pellets, bright blue chemical smelling, and they scatter them across the soil. It works sometimes for a while, then the damage comes back, so they buy more pellets. Season after season, the problem stays. The spending stays with it. What if the issue was never the product you chose, but the model you were given? There is a method that costs almost nothing. It requires no chemicals, no special tools, no repeat purchases. Farmers used it long before garden centers existed. It works with biology, not against it. And most people have everything they need for it sitting in their kitchen right now. Here is what most people believe about slugs and snails. They believe the problem is population. Too many of them in the garden, so you reduce the number and the damage stops. It sounds logical. It is the model the industry sells you on, quietly, every time you buy a new box of bait. But it is the wrong model, and that is not your fault. You were taught it the same way most home gardeners were, through product labels, through garden center displays, through advice that always ends with something to purchase. The real problem is behavior, not population. Slugs and snails are nocturnal. They move at night, feed in darkness, and retreat before sunrise. By the time you see the damage, they are already gone, back under boards, beneath mulch, inside the cool shadow of a pot or raised bed edge. Poison bait works only if they find it, eat enough of it, and die before reproducing. In a moist backyard environment, that chain breaks constantly. Rain dilutes the bait, other animals disturb it, and the ones that survive simply reproduce. The biology is not on your side when you fight this way. You are spending money to interrupt a system that resets itself every single night. What you actually need is a method that uses the slug's own instincts against it, one that requires no timing, no reapplication, no guesswork, one that simply works while you sleep. That method exists, and it has existed for a very long time. This method did not come from a laboratory. It did not come from a university extension program or a product development team. It came from farmers who had no money to spend and no store to drive to. Somewhere in rural Europe, well over 100 years ago, someone noticed that slugs were drowning in containers of fermenting liquid left near the garden. They noticed it, remembered it, and passed it on. For generations, the beer trap was common knowledge across small farms in Germany, the Netherlands, and the British countryside. It required nothing more than a shallow container and whatever fermented liquid was available, leftover ale, diluted yeast water, even the rinse from an empty barrel. Farmers placed them in the evening and cleared them in the morning. It was so simple it barely needed explaining. It was just part of how you kept a kitchen garden. Then the 20th century arrived. Chemical pesticides became widely available after World War II, when industrial processes originally developed for warfare were redirected toward agriculture. Products were cheap, heavily marketed, and presented as modern. Folk methods began to seem old-fashioned by comparison. The kind of knowledge passed down through families and farming communities slowly stopped being passed down at all. It was not suppressed, it was simply crowded out, replaced by a system that needed you to keep buying something. What is worth understanding is that the beer trap was never disproven. It was never shown to be ineffective. It was just forgotten, the way a lot of simple, proven methods get forgotten when there is no profit in remembering them. The science behind why it works was only studied seriously much later, and when researchers looked at it carefully, what they found was straightforward and quietly remarkable. Slugs and snails navigate almost entirely through smell. Their eyes are simple structures. They detect light and shadow, not much more. What guides them across your garden every night is a highly sensitive chemoreceptor system, concentrated in two small tentacles on the top of their head. They follow scent trails the way a river follows a valley, downhill toward the strongest source, without hesitation. Beer produces a specific combination of compounds that triggers this system with unusual intensity. The fermentation process generates yeast volatiles, organic molecules that disperse easily through cool night air and travel a surprising distance across open ground. Alongside those, there are dissolved sugars, carbon dioxide, and trace alcohols, all of which occur naturally in decaying plant matter. To a slug, this scent profile signals one thing: food, rich, reliable, worth crossing open ground for. This is important. Slugs are cautious animals under normal conditions. They avoid exposed surfaces. They stay close to cover. They do not wander into open spaces without reason. But when that fermentation scent reaches them, something overrides the caution. Studies conducted by researchers in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands confirm that slugs will cross barriers they would otherwise avoid. Dry surfaces, rough textures, even short distances of open soil, to reach a source of yeast-based fermentation. The attraction is not mild, it is directional and strong. Once they reach the container and enter it, the design does the rest. The liquid surface offers no grip. The walls of a smooth plastic container offer no traction. Slugs and snails that fall in do not climb out. They are not harmed by anything toxic. They simply cannot escape the geometry of the trap. By morning, the work is done. What makes this worth understanding is not just the mechanism, it is what the mechanism tells you. The slug is not your enemy, it is an animal following its instincts into a situation you designed. That is not cruelty. That is a system working the way a good system should, quietly, predictably, and without side effects. The setup is simple enough to do in 5 minutes, but how you do it matters because the difference between a trap that works consistently and one that does not usually comes down to a few small details that most people skip. Start with your container. You want something shallow, a plastic deli container, a yogurt tub, an old bowl you no longer use. The depth should be around 3 to 4 inches. Deeper is not better. Slugs need to be able to reach the liquid surface from the rim, and if the container is too tall, fewer of them will enter. The opening should be wide. A wider surface area catches more scent into the air and intercepts more slugs traveling across the bed. Dig a small hole and set the container into the ground so that its rim sits level with the soil surface. This is the step most people miss. If the rim is even half an inch above the soil, slugs will not cross it. They are low, slow-moving animals that follow the path of least resistance. The rim must be flush. Take an extra minute to get this right, and the trap becomes significantly more effective. Fill the container about halfway with beer. It does not need to be fresh. Leftover beer works perfectly. Flat, warm, even slightly sour. What you are using is the yeast and the fermentation compounds, and those do not require carbonation to function. A standard can of the cheapest beer available at your local store costs less than $1. One can fill 3 to 4 traps. For a typical backyard garden with 2 or 3 raised beds, the entire season's supply costs under $2. Place your traps in the evening, ideally just before dusk. Slugs begin moving at twilight, and you want the scent to be active when they do. Space them roughly every 3 feet along the edges of your beds, because that is where slugs enter from. The perimeter, moving inward. You do not need to cover the entire bed. You need to intercept the path. In the morning, check each container. Empty it, rinse it, reset it that same evening if conditions are right. Cool, moist nights are when slugs are most active. After rain is often the most productive time to run the system. Within the first 2 or 3 nights, you will see results. Not gradual results, clear ones. There is something that happens after the first week of running this system. The damage slows. Not because every slug in your garden is gone, but because you have interrupted the nightly cycle in a consistent and targeted way. The seedlings that were disappearing overnight begin to recover. The lettuces fill out. The soil around your bed stays undisturbed because nothing is being scattered across it. Nothing is breaking down into it except the small amount of beer that soaks in and evaporates harmlessly. That matters more than most people realize. Commercial slug pellets contain metaldehyde or iron phosphate. The first is toxic to birds, hedgehogs, and dogs. The second is considered safer, but both alter the chemistry of your soil surface in ways that affect the small organisms living there. The beetles, the ground-dwelling predatory insects, the creatures that actually help keep your garden in balance. When you stop using them, you stop that disruption. The earthworms stay, the ground beetles stay. The system that nature built into your backyard soil begins to function the way it was always meant to. This is what low-cost independence actually looks like in a garden. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is a container buried in the ground, a little leftover beer, and the slow return of a backyard that does not need you to keep purchasing things to stay healthy. Your family eats food grown in soil that has not been treated with poison. That is not a small thing. Over a season, over several seasons, the difference in your soil health and your spending becomes real and measurable. You do not need a perfect garden to start this. You need one bed, one trap, and one evening to try it. The results will be visible by morning. Let that be enough to begin. Gardening does not have to be expensive to be effective. That is something the industry quietly discourages you from believing, not through dishonesty exactly, but through habit. The habit of presenting every problem as something that requires a product. Slugs appear, so you buy pellets. Pellets stop working, so you buy more. The cycle continues, and somewhere along the way, the simple methods that worked for generations get left behind. The beer trap is not a miracle. It is not a secret weapon. It is just a proven method that asks very little of you and returns something reliable in exchange. A shallow container, a little leftover beer, the right placement, the right depth, the right evening. That is the whole system. It fits in 5 minutes and costs almost nothing. Start with one bed this season, set one trap, and check it in the morning. Watch what happens. Let the result speak for itself, because it will. And when it does, you will understand something that does not come from a product label or a garden center shelf. You will understand that your backyard already has most of what it needs. You are just learning to work with it.